In the city hall. After waiting for my fiancé Elias Miller for 3 hours, I tiredly sent a message, "Let's break up, Elias Miller." But as soon as I walked out of the city hall, I bumped into my boss, Jackson Hayes. "CEO, are you also getting married today, Ms. Hayes? Do you want to marry me?" Thinking of the message Elias Miller had just sent, "Lainey, stop being dramatic. Lily is really sick. Listen, let's talk about getting our marriage certificate in a couple of days." A thought suddenly popped into my head. I smiled at Jackson Hayes and replied, "Okay." Today was the day Elias Miller and I were supposed to get our marriage certificate. After waiting for him for 3 hours at the city hall, I finally got through to him on the phone. But it was his idealized ex, Lily Davis, who answered. "Where's Elias Miller? Elias is cooking for me." "Ms. Miller, is there something you need?" I gave a sarcastic sneer. Elias Miller and I had been together for 2 years, and I never knew he could cook. Just then, Elias Miller's voice came from the other end of the line, "Lainey, Lily almost fainted today, and her family isn't around. I'm just taking care of her." I gripped my phone tightly. "Elias Miller, I'm just asking you one thing. Are you still coming to get our marriage certificate with me today, Lainey? I can't leave right now." "What's the big deal about getting the certificate a couple of days later?" Elias Miller's tone was somewhat impatient. Just as I was about to speak, I faintly heard Lily Davis's exclamation from the other end of the phone, "Ow, that's hot." Then the call was cut off. Without even seeing it, I could imagine Elias Miller's eyes filled with concern as he comforted his idealized ex. Ever since Lily Davis came back, if she even slightly teared up in front of Elias Miller, he would look utterly pained. I never received that kind of treatment. In Elias Miller's eyes, I was supposed to be sensible and understanding. He never realized that I was a woman too, sometimes needing his care. My heart instinctively tightened, but it didn't hurt as much as I expected. Listening to the dial tone, I took a deep breath, a mocking curve playing on my lips, and tiredly sent a message, "Elias Miller, let's break up." Enough. Since Elias Miller wanted to comfort his idealized ex, I would make it happen for them. Just as I walked out of the city hall, I saw Jackson Hayes standing at the door, my boss, the CEO of Hayes Corporation. I paused, slightly surprised. As Jackson Hayes' secretary, I had no idea this was on his schedule today. "CEO, are you also getting married today?" Jackson Hayes' dark eyes swept over me, and he quietly hummed an affirmation. "Well, congratulations." I had wanted to ask why he was getting married alone, but remembering that as a secretary, I shouldn't overstep and inquire about my boss's private matters, I swallowed the words. Jackson Hayes smiled faintly. "Ms. Hayes, do you want to marry me?" I was stunned. "Huh? What a coincidence." Had Jackson Hayes also been stood up? Jackson Hayes' voice was low and steady. "Anyway, right now, both you and I are alone." Thinking of the message Elias Miller had just sent, "Lainey, stop being dramatic. Lily is really sick. Listen, let's talk about getting our marriage certificate in a couple of days." A thought suddenly popped into my head. I smiled at Jackson Hayes and replied, "Okay." Less than 10 minutes later, I held a freshly issued marriage certificate. Looking at the photo on the marriage certificate, I suddenly wondered if I had been a bit impulsive. "What? Regretting it?" Jackson Hayes asked softly. I pursed my lips and countered, "CEO, are you angry with Ms. Evans?" As his secretary, I knew some of my boss's private matters, and I had even helped pick out gifts for Ms. Evans. Although I hadn't met Ms. Evans, a woman Jackson Hayes would put so much thought into must have an unusual relationship with him. Jackson Yes looked at me, his voice very faint. "She's not qualified. Ms. Hayes, you'll understand later." I generally obeyed my boss. After all, he was the one who paid me. However, I felt that Jackson Hayes' gaze just now carried a hint of melancholy, which didn't fit his domineering CEO persona. After parting ways with Jackson Hayes, I returned to my studio apartment. When I was with Elias Miller, we didn't fully live together, so I had bought this studio apartment for myself. Back home, the first thing I did was delete and block all of Elias Miller's contact information. From then on, he would go his own path, and I would go my own path. No, I suddenly remembered my own path now included Jackson Hayes. He said he'd give me a week to adjust, and then I'd have to move in with him. Thinking about having to face him almost 24 hours a day in the future, he's my boss during the day, and then at night, I suddenly felt a bit flustered. I wondered why Jackson Hayes suggested marriage. Was he also angered by Ms. Evans? I had only been his secretary for a month, and we weren't very familiar. And yet, I actually agreed? Thinking of Jackson Hayes' face, could I have been swayed by his looks? As I was daydreaming, my phone suddenly rang. It was an unknown number. Lainey Hayes, did you block me? Elias Miller's gritted voice came from the other end, and I could imagine his grim expression at that moment. That's just how he was. After being together for so long, whenever I was throwing a fit, he'd think I was being dramatic and immediately get annoyed. I wondered why he was so blind when Lily Davis was constantly being dramatic in front of him. Before yesterday, I would have accommodated him, appeased him, but now, yeah, we broke up. Why would I keep you unblocked? My mocking tone seemed to irritate Elias Miller even more. Can you stop being unreasonable? If you want to get your marriage certificate, we can go tomorrow. I laughed in exasperation. Elias Miller, you're the only man in the world. You've lost your chance. After saying that, I immediately hung up and blocked him, all in one swift motion. The next day, I went downstairs for work, and just as I stepped out of the neighborhood, a car pulled up beside me. It was a familiar car, Elias Miller's. He got out and walked up to me, immediately questioning, Lainey Hayes, are you done being dramatic? Can you be sensible? Blocking someone is childish. I rolled my eyes in exasperation. Mr. Miller, are you suffering from amnesia? We've already broken up. Elias Miller looked at me deeply, as if only then realizing I wasn't joking. Lily was really sick yesterday. I was just taking care of her. If you're angry about that, I apologize. His apology was so perfunctory. I regretted having been a bad judge of character when I chose him as a boyfriend back then. I sighed softly, pained for my past self. I looked up at him. Elias Miller, we both know what your relationship with Lily Davis is. As your ex-girlfriend, I'll give you a friendly piece of advice. Be a better judge of character. Move aside. Lainey Hayes, what do you mean? How has Lily offended you? She's just my good friend, Elias Miller said angrily. Of course, she was the apple of his eye. He wouldn't allow me to say a bad word about Lily Davis. I shrugged indifferently, pushed Elias Miller aside, and raised my hand to flag down a taxi. At that moment, a black Bentley stopped beside me. The driver got out and quickly walked up to me, speaking respectfully, Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes has something on today, so he asked me to pick you up for work. I was stunned for several seconds before I realized that the Mr. Hayes the driver referred to must be Jackson Hayes. This must be a side effect of a quick marriage. I almost forgot I married him yesterday. Before I could speak, Elias Miller looked at the driver in shock and asked first, what did you just call her? The driver glanced at him. This is my boss's wife. Faye, of course, I call her Mrs. Hayes. Elias Miller was even more incredulous. Lainey Hayes, when did you get married? Yesterday. I lightly uttered 2 words, ignored Elias Miller, and got into the car. This news must have been a blow to Elias Miller, as he had always been so confident about me, believing I couldn't live without him. Even when he abandoned me for Lily Davis time and again during our dates, I always ended up forgiving him. But this time, I wouldn't. Back at the company, I quickly got into work mode, first organizing the documents from various departments that needed Jackson Hayes' approval, then handing them over to his assistant, Sean Thompson. Sean Thompson didn't take the documents, but smiled and said, Ms. Hayes, from now on, you'll deliver the documents yourself. I was a bit hesitant. When I was suddenly promoted to CEO's secretary, Sean Thompson had given me many precautions, one of which was not to enter Jackson Hayes' office without permission. Sean Thompson explained, the CEO instructed that Ms. Hayes can now enter and exit his office freely. His tone was somewhat meaningful, and I guessed he probably knew about Jackson Hayes and me getting our marriage certificate. Okay. Holding the documents, I reluctantly knocked and walked in. I hadn't quite figured out how to face Jackson Hayes yet. Boss turned husband, it was bound to be a bit awkward. Behind the large desk, Jackson Hayes was concentrating on reading documents. I quickly put the documents down, intending to slip out quietly. Ms. Hayes. The man's usual calm voice came from behind me. I took a deep breath, put on a professional smile, and turned to ask, CEO, the documents are on the table. Are there any other instructions? Jackson Hayes put down his pen, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking at me with a half-smile. I raised a hand to touch my face. I'd put on light makeup this morning, had it smudged. After a moment of silence, Jackson Hayes slow. Why spoke, have you eaten breakfast? I quickly responded, CEO, do you want to buy breakfast? I'll go right now. Sean Thompson had asked me to order breakfast for Jackson Hayes a few times before. Jackson Hayes curled his lips, teasing, Ms. Hayes truly is a dedicated and responsible employee. I guess so, otherwise, why would the CEO suddenly promote a newcomer like me to be your secretary? I wasn't being humble at all. After all, besides this reason, I couldn't think of any other. I had originally applied for the design department but was informed I was hired as the CEO's secretary. If it weren't for the doubled salary, I wouldn't have wanted this secretary job. Hearing this, Jackson Hayes's eyes flickered. He raised a finger and pointed towards the coffee table. There's breakfast there. Eat it. I paused, looking at him in confusion, not understanding what he meant. Jackson Hayes patiently repeated, your stomach problems come from not eating on time, especially skipping breakfast. That breakfast is for you. Have some. My boss brought me breakfast? I had a bad feeling about this, and how did he know I had stomach problems? Thinking this, I also asked it out loud. CEO, how do you know I have stomach problems? And how do you know I skip breakfast? Jackson Hayes said casually, you're my secretary, shouldn't I know a little about you? He paused, then looked at me again and said, Ms. Hayes, have you forgotten that you are not only my employee now but also the person on my marriage certificate? I don't want to become a widower right after getting married. His words sounded heartless, but they made my heart clench slightly, and a warmth suddenly welled up in my eyes. Elias Miller and I had been together for 2 years, and he never noticed my sensitive stomach, let alone reminded me to eat on time. I remembered one time I had a stomachache and was really uncomfortable. I called him and asked him to buy me medicine. He simply replied, buy tea online yourself, I have an urgent matter right now. Before I could speak, he hung up without hesitation. Later, I accidentally learned from his friend that Elias Miller's urgent matter that day was picking up Lily Davis, who had just arrived at the airport. I knew that with Elias Miller, I would always come after Lily Davis. Perhaps, back then, he was only with me because Lily Davis hadn't returned yet. I was just a substitute. Miss Hayes? The man's pleasant, cool scent wafted into my nostrils. I suddenly snapped back to reality, seeing Jackson Hayes's handsome face magnified before my eyes. My heart inexplicably raced. CEO, is something wrong? Startled by Jackson Hayes, all those suppressed emotions I had just felt vanished. Jackson Hayes raised a hand and lightly tapped my forehead. Why are you daydreaming? Hurry up and eat your breakfast. This small gesture made my cheeks flush slightly. I instinctively glanced towards the door, worried that it would look bad if someone walked in right then. Although I had married Jackson Hayes, I still didn't want people at the company to know, otherwise there would be endless gossip. Jackson Hayes saw my cautious manner and couldn't help but frown. Don't worry, my office isn't a place just anyone can walk into. Oh. I quickly walked to the coffee table and picked up the breakfast, then I'll take it back to my desk to eat. Ms. Hayes, if you take breakfast out of my office, aren't you afraid of being misunderstood? I paused, and it seemed he was right. I quietly sat down on the nearby sofa again, chuckling awkwardly, then I'll eat it here before I leave. Only then did Jackson Hayes return to his desk, satisfied, and continued looking at documents. At this point, the office was overly quiet, making me afraid to chew too loudly, lest I disturb the peace. I had to admit, the breakfast Jackson Hayes prepared suited my taste perfectly. He seemed like a very thoughtful person. I instinctively looked at the man behind the desk, noble and distinguished, strikingly handsome. Normally at the company, I often saw some female colleagues infatuated with Jackson Hayes. Before, I only saw him as my boss, but now, looking at him seriously, he really was quite attractive. It was hard to imagine that I had actually married him. Perhaps sensing my gaze, Jackson Hayes looked up. I hastily withdrew my eyes, finished the last bite of breakfast, and stood up, saying, CEO, I've finished eating. I'll go back to work now. As I reached the door, the man's gentle voice came from behind me, Mrs. Hayes, let's have dinner together tonight. I neither agreed nor refused, just hurried out. Mainly, I couldn't handle being called Mrs. Hayes yet. Before, with Elias Miller, I was always chasing after him. Now, to suddenly be treated this way, and by my own boss, felt quite unsettling. Soon, it was quitting time. I finished my work at 7 o'clock. I glanced at the CEO's office, still lit. I wondered when he would leave. Had he forgotten about dinner this morning? It would be fine if he forgot, otherwise, facing Jackson Hayes's face for too long, my poor heart couldn't take it. Just as I was thinking, a text message popped up. Jackson Hayes, meet me in the parking garage. I sighed softly, resigned, and headed to the parking garage. Ms. Hayes, are you waiting for someone? Standing at the parking garage elevator lobby, I ran into Ryan Johnson, the marketing manager. I nodded, yes. Ryan Johnson stared directly at me. Lainey, when do you have time? Let's get dinner together sometime. I frowned slightly. When I first joined the company, Ryan Johnson would often ask me out to dinner. I had refused many times, but he was persistent. I was well aware of his intentions. Just as I was about to refuse, my phone rang. Seeing that it was Jackson Hayes calling, I quickly answered. "Hello, exit B," Jackson Hayes said calmly. "Okay, I'll be right there." After hanging up, I waved to Ryan Johnson and hurried towards exit B. Seeing the Bentley from this morning, I habitually opened the back door to get in, only to hear Jackson Hayes's calm voice from the driver's seat. "Miss Hayes, do you really think I'm your chauffeur?" I'm used to it." I chuckled awkwardly and sat in the front passenger seat. Jackson Hayes glanced at me. "Miss Hayes is quite popular." Why the sarcastic tone? It took me a moment to realize he had just seen me talking to Ryan Johnson. Could it be, Jackson Hayes, you're not jealous, are you? Realizing this, my courage suddenly grew, and I addressed him by his full name. Jackson Hayes gave a soft humph and didn't reply, starting the car and driving off. But I clearly saw him stiffen slightly, the awkwardness of having his thoughts exposed. This man fell in love with me? No way. The restaurant we went to was an upscale restaurant. While waiting for our food, I went to the restroom. As I walked out of the restroom, I saw Jackson Hayes talking on the phone in the restaurant hallway. He had just hung up. I was about to walk towards him when I suddenly saw a familiar figure collide with Jackson Hayes. It looked like an accidental bump. But wasn't that woman Lily Davis? "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Lily Davis apologized to Jackson Hayes with a flustered expression, her voice sweet and syrupy, giving me goosebumps. Jackson Hayes took a big step back and glanced at her. Lily Davis looked even more shy. "Hello, sir, could I get your number?" Jackson Hayes uttered two bland words. "No, thank you." Then he strode away. Lily Davis stamped her foot in frustration. I watched this scene, a cold sneer playing on my lips. Lily Davis was clearly trying to flirt with Jackson Hayes. If Elias Miller knew, I wondered what he would think. After all, Lily Davis was his idealized ex, pure and innocent in his mind. Back at the table, the dishes had already arrived. I was somewhat surprised. Jackson Hayes had ordered all my favorite dishes. He seemed to really know me. We were only halfway through dinner when a familiar voice interrupted us. "Ms. Miller, what are you doing here?" I didn't even need to look up to know it was Lily Davis. Immediately after, I heard Elias Miller's angry voice. "Lainey Hayes, did you break up with me because you found another man?" I had initially intended to ignore them, but hearing their questions directed at me, I found it not funny but rather retorted. "Where I am, what I'm doing, what does it have to do with you?" Lily Davis looked somewhat aggrieved. "But this is an upscale restaurant for couples, and you with another man." I wasn't going to humor her. "What, is this your restaurant? Do you think I can't afford to eat here or that I can't come here with another man?" But when Elias Miller heard me speak of his idealized ex that way, his face darkened even further. "Lainey Hayes, you're clearly in the wrong. Why are you being so aggressive? Who is this man? Why are you with him? My identity is none of your business." A calm voice rang out. Jackson Hayes, who had been facing away from them, slowly turned around, his cold gaze sweeping over both of them. Seeing Jackson Hayes, Lily Davis was initially stunned, the hint of triumph on her lips gradually turning into jealousy. The man she had just been interested in, why was he here? Elias Miller was clearly intimidated by Jackson Hayes's cold aura. I walked over to Jackson Hayes, linked my arm through his, and said with a light smile, "Let me introduce you, this is my husband, Jackson Hayes." "What? Jackson Hayes isn't your boss?" Elias Miller was shocked. He had thought the man looked familiar. The CEO of Hayes Corporation, he had seen him from afar at a banquet once. Only then did I remember that when I was hired as Jackson Hayes's secretary, I had mentioned it to Elias Miller. At the time, he had just dismissively said, "Someone of his status probably just values your abilities." In his eyes, I had no qualities that would make Jackson Hayes like me. But he forgot, I was once one of the top 3 best-looking students in our university. Jackson Hayes looked down at me and said calmly, "I am Lainey's boss, but now I'm also her husband. Mr. Miller, since you know my identity, you shouldn't bother my wife anymore." He didn't even glance at Elias Miller. Although Elias Miller was a wealthy heir, he was no match for Jackson Hayes. He seated, only able to glare at me. Lily Davis clenched her hands. "Ms. Miller, weren't you supposed to get your marriage certificate with Elias yesterday? How are you married to Mr. Hayes?" She still couldn't believe I could have such good luck. I said coldly, "Well, I have to thank you. If you hadn't clung to Elias Miller yesterday, I might have missed Jackson." I paused, raising an eyebrow. "But Lily Davis, you seem quite interested in all my men." I took out my phone, tapped a few times, and handed it to Elias Miller. Elias Miller, take a look at the pure and kind girl you have in your heart. I hadn't intended to go this far, but unfortunately, Lily Davis insisted on provoking me. This video was of her trying to flirt with Jackson Hayes, which I had recorded. Lily Davis also leaned in to look, then her eyes widened. Elias, I was just. Elias Miller wasn't stupid, he certainly understood Lily Davis's intentions towards Jackson Hayes at that moment. But whether to save face or to choose to believe Lily Davis, he looked at me with an ugly expression. Lainey Hayes, I know exactly what kind of person Lily is. What do you think this video proves? Look at yourself, as my fiancé, you turn around and marry someone else. Have you been hooked up with a rich guy for a while, just pretending to break up with me? Listen to these words Elias Miller said, every single one blaming me. In his eyes, I had accused him of cheating. It was truly ridiculous. I must have been out of my mind to like him back then. Ly Davis breathed a sigh of relief at Elias Miller's words, a hint of triumph flashing in her eyes. She knew Elias Miller would always stand by her. I said mockingly, Elias Miller, it doesn't matter what you think. I've now fulfilled your desires with Lily Davis, and I'm married. Let's both move on. If we meet again, let's pretend not to know each other. Elias Miller was about to speak when Jackson Hayes coldly interrupted, Mr. Miller, before getting married yesterday, Lainey and I had a clear superior-subordinate relationship. While we don't need to explain anything to you, I don't want to hear anyone slander my wife. With that, he picked up my bag, took my hand, and said, let's go. I let him lead me out of the restaurant. It had been a long time since anyone had defended me like that. At this moment, my weary heart seemed to find a touch of peace, and a slight flutter. A week passed in a flash. I slowly adapted to my relationship with Jackson Hayes. Although at work, Jackson Hayes didn't give me any special treatment because of our relationship. In life, however, I must say he was a very good husband, very attentive and thoughtful. I suddenly felt quite lucky that I had been stood up at the city hall that day, only to marry Jackson Hayes. But I still hadn't figured out if Jackson Hayes had really been stood up that day, and married me in a fit of pique. I asked him once, and he just smiled, saying the time wasn't right yet. After that, I didn't ask again. According to our previous agreement, I also moved into Jackson Hayes's mansion. However, Jackson Hayes had already left for a business trip right after I moved in, which avoided the initial awkwardness of living together. Even though he wasn't here, he still reminded me to eat on time every day. My stomach problems hadn't flared up during this time. After work today, I went back to my studio apartment to pack a few things to take to the mansion. As I left the apartment, a gust of autumn wind blew, feeling a bit chilly. I walked to the intersection to hail a taxi when a dark shadow suddenly appeared behind me, getting closer and closer. I was about to quicken my pace but was grabbed by a large hand. I screamed in fright, Lainey, it's me, Elias Miller's voice. Still startled, I looked up, and it really was Elias Miller. Elias Miller, what are you doing here? I've been waiting for you for days, and I finally found you. Elias Miller looked at me, a strong smell of alcohol wafting with his breath. I frowned tightly and forcefully shook off his hand. We've already broken up. Why are you waiting for me, Lainey? It turns out you were right. Lily Davis lied to me. She just wanted to find a richer man. It seemed Elias Miller wasn't entirely convinced by Lily Davis after seeing the video that day. Perhaps he even investigated her. I raised an eyebrow. Congratulations on finally seeing her clearly. But what does that have to do with me? Elias Miller's expression dimmed. I'm sorry, Lainey. Can we not break up? His words made me laugh speechlessly. Was he only realizing my worth now that his idealized ex had betrayed him? Elias Miller, I'm married. Even if I weren't, there's no chance for us. Ask yourself, in these past 2 years, did you truly like me, or were you just treating me as Lily Davis's substitute? Elias Miller was silent for a moment, then grabbed my hand again. Lainey, I've thought about it. I like you. I just didn't realize I had fallen for you without knowing it, so what? My heart was calm in the face of Elias Miller's sudden confession. Just because you say you like me, does that mean I have to like you back? Please don't come looking for me anymore. I don't want my husband to misunderstand. Hearing my words, Elias Miller's eyes turned frighteningly red, and his grip on my hand tightened. I tried to shake him off forcefully but couldn't. I felt a bit scared. Elias Miller, let go. Suddenly, Elias Miller adjured from a punch, almost falling to the ground. It was Jackson Hayes. Seeing him, my heart instantly settled. Jackson Hayes narrowed his eyes at Elias Miller. Elias Miller, I warned you not to bother my wife again. Elias Miller raised a hand to wipe a trace of blood from the corner of his mouth. Under the influence of alcohol, he seemed much bolder when facing Jackson Hayes. Lainey was my fiancée. You interfered with us. I looked at him, laughing without mercy. Elias Miller, isn't it ridiculous to pretend to be so devoted now? I'm married to Jackson Hayes now, and I'm simply his wife. As for you, go do whatever you need to do and don't appear in front of us again. After saying that, I pulled Jackson Hayes away, leaving Elias Miller stunned in place. Once in the car, I pondered for a moment and then said, I just came to pick up some things. I don't know why Elias Miller was here. Regardless of whether Jackson Hayes would overthink it, I still explained to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings. Jackson Hayes softly hummed, I know. It's good that you're okay. This simple sentence, however, warmed my heart. He came to find me the first thing after his business trip. This must be what it feels like to be valued. Jackson Hayes, he asked, a little puzzled. Can I hug you? As soon as the words left my mouth, I leaned over and hugged him tightly, regardless of his answer. At this moment, I only saw him as my husband, not my boss. I distinctly felt the man's body stiffen slightly, then he raised his arms and hugged me back, whispering, Lainey Hayes, you'll always have me. His tone was firm, and there seemed to be a hint of satisfaction. No man had ever said such words to me before. I heard my own heart pounding like a drum. If I hadn't been fully conscious, I would have thought Jackson Hayes had liked me for a long time. Weekend. I was at home, planning to paint. Actually, I majored in design in college, but I hadn't picked up a paint brush in a long time. I called Jackson Hayes to ask if I could use his study. Jackson Hayes, I want to paint. Can I use your study? Jackson Hayes seemed to hesitate on the phone, then said, the room next to my study, you can paint there, okay. By the way, when are you coming back? I asked. Soon. Do you want dessert? I'll bring some for you. I paused, then smiled, if it's no trouble, please do. I did like sweets, but I hadn't expected Jackson Hayes to notice. After hanging up, I took my art supplies to the room Jackson Hayes mentioned. I had been living here for about half a month but had never entered this room. The moment I opened the door, I was stunned. It was actually an art studio, filled with many art supplies. They were all unopened, though. Did Jackson Hayes also like to paint? As his secretary, I knew Jackson Hayes's basic information by heart, but painting wasn't listed among his hobbies. Still, this art studio was very comfortable, and I quickly immersed myself in painting. I don't know how much time passed until the door was pushed open, and Jackson Hayes walked in, holding a dessert box and a bouquet of yellow roses. Finished painting? I put down my paintbrush and stood up to face him. Yes, it's been a while, so I'm a bit rusty. Jackson Hayes carefully looked at my painting and smiled faintly. Not bad, your skills haven't faded. I was drawn to the things in his hand and didn't pay attention to his words for a moment. Are these flowers for me? Of course, they're for Mrs. Hayes. Girls usually like flowers. Jackson Hayes handed me the flowers, then placed the dessert on a nearby table and opened it. You can have some dessert, we'll eat dinner soon. Holding the bouquet, the rich fragrance immediately filled the air, and my lips curled unconsciously. Thank you. This must be what it feels like to be cherished. The dessert was a delicate strawberry cake, just the flavor I liked. Jackson Hayes, I've noticed why. Oh, you're a boss who truly understands his employees. Jackson Hayes looked at me, a slight curve on his lips. Only you. My cheeks immediately flushed. I quickly changed the subject. Why do you have this art studio at home? Do you paint too? Jackson Hayes's eyes lifted slightly at the corners. I don't paint. Then this. I hadn't finished speaking. Jackson Hayes cut me off calmly. I prepared it for you. I pressed my lips together. If I still hadn't realized something was amiss, I would be truly foolish. I looked up at him. How did you know I could paint? I was certain I hadn't written it on my resume. Jackson Hayes calmly said. Mrs. Hayes initially applied for the design department. Those who study design usually know how to paint to some extent. This art studio clearly looks set up for oil painting. How did you know I liked oil painting? I stared straight at him, trying to discern any subtle expression, but the man was very composed, with no hint of guilt in his expression. He just smiled faintly. Wait a little longer, and I'll tell you. He paused, then added, Ms. Hayes, next week is Eastwood University's anniversary. Please put it on my schedule. With that, he walked out of the art studio. It took me a moment to react. Was Jackson Hayes also from Eastwood University? But, someone like him must have been a prominent figure at school. Why had I never heard of him? A few days later. Eastwood University's anniversary day. I hadn't planned to go back, but Jackson Hayes was invited back to Eastwood University, and as his secretary, I accompanied him. After seeing the relevant information, I realized that Hayes Corporation donated a lot of funds to Eastwood University every year. No wonder Eastwood University listed Jackson Hayes as a special guest. It had been a long time since I returned to school after graduation. While Jackson Hayes and the principal were discussing matters, I wandered around the campus alone. Just my luck, I ran into Lily Davis again. But she was indeed an Eastwood University student, so her presence wasn't unusual. I averted my gaze, intending to pretend not to see her and take a different route. But when she saw me, she immediately came over, completely without the delicate demeanor she had in front of Elias Miller, and called out to me assertively, "Lainey Hayes, did you say something to Elias? Is that why he's been ignoring me lately?" I frowned slightly. It seemed Elias Miller's desire to reconcile with me that day wasn't drunken talk. He had really abandoned Lily Davis. I curled my lips mockingly. "You know what you've done behind Elias Miller's back. Elias Miller isn't stupid." Lily Davis gritted her teeth in anger. "It's all your fault. If you hadn't shown Elias that video, how would he have suspected me? Lainey Hayes, you're just doing this for revenge." "Lily Davis, Elias Miller is a man I didn't want. Why would I waste my time taking revenge on you too? Don't flatter yourself by thinking you're that important." Lily Davis's arrogant face twisted in anger. She thought of something and sneered, "You just hooked up with a rich guy, that's all. Do you really think a man like Jackson Hayes is sincere with you? He's just toying with you. How do you know I'm not sincere with my wife?" A cold, deep voice cut in. Jackson Hayes walked over, wrapped an arm around my waist, and stared coldly at Lily Davis, saying each word distinctly, "The only woman I've ever loved in my life is my wife." His words stunned both Lily Davis and me. Lily Davis's expression froze, her heart shattered, her eyes filled with jealousy and resentment. Even if she wanted to try to seduce Jackson Hayes, it was now highly unlikely. And in Jackson Hayes's words, I finally seemed to understand some things I had always overlooked. "Jackson Hayes, have you known me for a long time?" Jackson Hayes chuckled, not answering directly. Instead, he said, "Let me take you somewhere." Under Lily Davis's unwilling gaze, Jackson Hayes and I intertwined our fingers and left. Jackson Hayes took me to the art studio at Eastwood University. I was very familiar with this place. For 4 years of college, I would come here to draw whenever I had free time. I tilted my head slightly to look at Jackson Hayes. "How do you know this place? Were you really a student at Eastwood University?" Jackson Hayes nodded. "But I only stayed at Eastwood University for half a year before I went abroad." I suddenly understood. No wonder I never heard of you. Someone like you would definitely have been popular all over campus. Jackson Hayes chuckled softly. Someone like me? I searched my mind for words to describe him. Handsome, noble, like a god from the heavens. So, that's the image I have in my Mrs. Hayes's mind. Jackson Hayes lowered his gaze, his eyes burning as they met mine. He said softly, 6 years ago, I met an even more radiant girl right here. A thought flashed through my mind, and I asked, startled, that person wasn't me, was it? But I was sure I had never seen him before. Jackson Hayes didn't answer, seemingly lost in his own memories, speaking softly. That day, I happened to pass by the art studio and looked in through the window. A girl in a white dress with a high ponytail was focused on painting. The sunlight streaming through the window fell on her, as if casting a halo around her. It was beautiful. That's when I knew a girl like that existed at the school. The second time I saw her was at the freshman welcome party. She played a beautiful piano piece. That's when I learned her name was Lainey Hayes. Actually, I was quite popular on campus back then. After the party, many freshmen were eager to meet me, but she seemed not to notice me at all. Later, I would often take a detour past the art studio and saw her many times. Each time, she was immersed in her own world, as if everything outside had nothing to do with her. Hearing this, my eyes were already slightly red, and my voice choked. "And then? You went abroad?" Jackson Hayes snapped back to reality, looking deeply at me. "Yes, my plan was already set to go abroad. But meeting you was outside my plan. I never thought that even after I left, your image would linger in my heart for 5 whole years." His words felt like a large hand fiercely clutching my heart. Tears uncontrollably welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision. I knew I was attractive. Many people had complimented me since I was a child, and I had received many love letters. But for someone to care for 5 years, I had never imagined, nor dared to imagine, such a profound love. I looked up at Jackson Hayes. "Why didn't you ever look for me?" Jackson Hayes gently wiped the tears from the corner of my eyes, his voice a little hoarse. When I came back, Elias Miller was already by your side, so I had no choice but to keep those feelings hidden. However, I didn't expect you to apply for a position at Hayes Corporation. Perhaps fate was giving me a chance. I sniffled. So, you deliberately made me your secretary. I thought I was promoted because I was competent. Promoting you to secretary was my personal desire, but you genuinely met the requirements too. Jackson Hayes playfully tapped my nose. Do you think your resume would have even reached me if the company's HR hadn't approved it? I pursed my lips. That day at City Hall, who were you going to marry? If he couldn't forget me, how could he agree to marry another woman? Jackson Hayes chuckled softly. Mrs. Hayes, don't you understand yet? How could I marry another woman before you? The moment my heart stirred, it was already beyond control. I was stunned for a long time before I slowly understood. My heart pounded faster and faster, and I asked with a trembling voice, were you there for me that day? Jackson Hayes's eyes were blazing. I felt Elias Miller wasn't good enough for you. I originally intended to stop your wedding, but I didn't expect Elias Miller to stand you up, so everything that seemed like a coincidence was merely his long-planned strategy. This seemingly aloof man's deep-seated love for the girl from years ago had not faded, like aged liquor, becoming more potent with time. I stood on my tiptoes, wrapped my arms around his neck, and kissed his thin lips. Jackson Hayes, thank you for not giving up on me. Before, I thought Elias Miller liked me. At least, before Lily Davis came back, he was very attentive to me. Now, with a comparison, I realized Elias Miller's kindness to me was only because I bore a slight resemblance to Lily Davis. I used to be so fixated on Elias Miller, never seeing the gaze that was always on me from behind. Thinking about it now, I was hopelessly foolish. Thankfully, Jackson Hayes didn't give up. Jackson Hayes wiped away my tears, then lowered his head to kiss my eyebrows, with utmost tenderness. Lainey Hayes, I finally married my girl. He took my hand, his long fingers intertwining with mine, and led me gracefully out of the art studio. The autumn sun shone upon us, lengthening our shadows. That evening, back home, Jackson Hayes went to the study. After my shower, I picked up my phone to reply to a few messages and decided to check my social media feed. Suddenly, I saw that Jackson Hayes had posted something, which was very rare for him. The picture was of my back at Eastwood University today, with the caption, "My wish fulfilled." Curiously, I clicked on his profile picture and was surprised to find that he had posted on his social media feed before, but he had blocked me from seeing it. I opened his first post. The picture was of my back in the art studio, with the caption, "She seems to love painting." The second post was a picture of my back at the basketball court, watching others play, with the caption, "Is someone she likes on the court?" My hand holding the phone trembled. I quickly scrolled thr. Oof every post. There was a 5-year blank period in between. Then, 2 years ago, another picture of my back, captioned, 5 years. I finally saw her again. But she's with another man, and she seems to really like him. I quickly scrolled through a few more, then saw the post from the day we got our marriage certificate. I finally married my girl. From then on, his social media feed was filled with my daily life, and I hadn't noticed at all. My eyes began to blur, tears fell uncontrollably, and my chest ached, making it hard to breathe. So, all these years, he had always been silently watching me from behind, from places I couldn't see him. When he saw someone else by my side, he didn't even dare to intrude. But he was Jackson Hayes, the CEO of Hayes Corporation. He should be brilliant, the center of attention. For me, he was so timid. I stood up and rushed straight to the study. When I pushed open the door, Jackson Hayes looked up at me, saw my red eyes, and immediately stood up, striding towards me. I quickly ran into his arms, holding him tightly. Jackson Hayes embraced me back, asking in a muffled voice, "Why are you crying?" My voice was still tearful. "Jackson Hayes, why are you so silly? Why didn't you tell me? What if I had really married Elias Miller that day?" Jackson Hayes knew I had seen his social media feed. He gently patted my back and said softly, "As long as you're happy, nothing else matters." I lifted my tear-reddened eyes, looked at him, and smiled. "Jackson Hayes, from now on, I'll only love you." The last time I saw Elias Miller was at a banquet I attended with Jackson Hayes. He called out to me, and I had to stop my steps, wanting to leave. The woman by his side was not Lily Davis. I had heard that Lily Davis had become some wealthy heir's girlfriend. He looked at me, his eyes full of complex emotions. "Lainey, how have you been recently?" I gave him a fleeting, indifferent glance. "Without you and Lily Davis, I'm doing very Well. Elias Miller frowned, looking at me, now shining like a brilliant gem. He still couldn't give up, asking, "Is Jackson Hayes good to you?" I smiled lightly. "Elias Miller, for this, I truly have to thank you for the favor of not marrying me. It allowed me to marry Jackson, and I'm very happy. So please, don't disturb me again." Leaving that remark, I walked towards Jackson Hayes, linked my arm through his, and said softly, "Let's go home." Jackson Hayes turned to glance at Elias Miller, who was still staring intently at me, and said gently, "All right." Thank you for watching today's story. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it with your friends. We look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Feel free to share your perspectives, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more exciting stories. See you next time.